Hello, in this video I'm going to talk to you a little bit about data types in JavaScript. So here's some JavaScript code. From our last video, the first few lines should be fairly familiar to you. In that video, we talked about comments, the green text following the two / characters. We also talked about variables as being labeled containers that we can use to hold some information. We know we use the let keyword to declare a variable. So if we look at the first line, this is a comment. So it does nothing, has no effect on the actual program. The second line has the keyword let and a variable name, outMessage. So this basically creates for us a container. This container has the name outMessage. The next line has the keyword let again and the name of a variable, my number. So as before, we have another container called my number. And this time, there is an assignment operator and a literal value that follows it. And this is the number 7. So that's what ends up in our my number variable. The next line looks quite similar. Again, this creates a variable. I'm just going to put it here. I'm going to call it my string. Here our assignment has quotation marks around it. And this is our way of writing a string literal. You might wonder, what are the difference between a number and a string? JavaScript has a number of different data types that are used to represent different kinds of data. A number, which can be used for calculations. This would be something like the value 7 or the value of pi, 3.14. Strings we saw before in our previous video. They're a way of storing text. In some languages, a container, a variable, can only be used to hold a particular data type. In JavaScript, this is not the case. It can hold whatever we put in it. So here we've seen an example of putting the value 7 in one variable, and this is the number. We've seen an example of putting a string, which is also 7, but in this case it's some text, and this could have been a different text string like hello or an entire sentence. And in fact, we've already seen another data type in our outMessage variable. When we didn't assign any value to it, what actually happens is a data type called undefined gets put in this. And if we were to check it or log the value inside this variable, we would see it would say to us undefined. Okay, let's follow through this code example and see what happens. If we look at line 6, this is assigning a value to a variable, and we can see that because we have a variable name and we have an assignment operator. On the right hand side of this, we have an expression, and before we can do this assignment and put the value into the variable, we have to work out what this expression evaluates to. So let's have a look at this. The blue part here is a string literal, and this is similar to our previous video where the plus operator is doing concatenation of strings. We have a string, we have the plus operator, so it's going to join something onto the end of this string. So we've got some text that says my number is, then we've got the variable name my number, which if we have a look contains the value 7, so this should evaluate to my number is 7. Then it's concatenating some further text, which is a space and a bracket, another bracket at the end, and between the two brackets there's something we haven't seen before. There's a keyword here called type of, and this is a particular operator that takes the name of a variable or a literal value and tells us its type. So every one of these variables in JavaScript has its value that's stored in it, but that value also has a type. And type of is a way of us being able to see what that type is. We would expect that for out message, its type would be undefined, the same as what its value looks like. In the case of my number, we expect this to be a number. In the case of my string, we expect this to be a string. And it's worth pointing out, our variable names have no impact on what can or can't be stored in there, what data types. So let's have a look at this. If we were to execute line 6, we would be storing a string that says my number is 7 and in brackets number into our variable out message. So that would replace this undefined here with that string, which I'm not going to write it in full because it won't fit in there. Next we log that value, print it to the console, so we can have a look what that would look like. We would basically see what we have down the bottom here. My number is 7 and its data type is a number. If we do much the same thing on line 9 and 10, we say my string is, we have a look at the value in the variable my string, and we also check its type, and we build this into a string that we then log. And when we do this, we see my string is 7, but this time its data type is different, it's a string. And you'll notice JavaScript made no complaints about concatenating a string here with a number. It automatically converts that number into a string and joins it together with the other string. So we'll talk later about how that can be problematic, but in most cases that's just useful for us, that it automatically converts between types for us. Let's have a look at what's happening on line 12, because this is maybe a bit surprising. We had our variable called myString. Currently it contains a string 7. Now what we're doing is we're assigning something to that variable, and again we need to look at the expression that follows the assignment operator. And the expression that follows the assignment operator here is a condition, and that condition says, is the value in the variable my number less than 20? So it's some kind of test. Condition is basically a test. It checks the value in this variable my number. We can have a look at that. It's 7. So effectively here we're saying, is 7 less than 20? And obviously numerically 7 is less than 20. And the result of this is a data type called a Boolean, which can be either true or false. And this is what we use later for code that goes in different directions depending on the state of the program. And we'll talk about that next week. So what happens here? Well, we calculate that this value is true, and we store that value into the variable myString. So instead of myString having the value 7 here, it now has true. And if we execute these final two lines, which you'll notice are exactly the same as line 9 and 10, they're going to do something different, because now our variable myString contains a different value, true. And where that line previously printed myString is 7, it now prints my number is true, which my number is a typo, I'm sorry. I should have said myString here. So it should say myString is true, and that value is a Boolean. Alright, so let's just review what the different data types in JavaScript are. We have a data type called Boolean, and it can have two different values. It can have the value true or false. We typically get these Boolean values by a condition expression that tests some value. We have a special data type called undefined, and typically you're not doing a variable assignment and setting its value to undefined. Undefined is a type used when the value of a variable has never been set. So if you declare a variable, like we did on the first line, and we don't set it to a value, it's undefined. There's a data type null, and this is kind of similar to undefined. So if we want to have a variable that has a value of nothing, we can give it the value null. There's the number data type, and we've seen a few examples of this. One would be 7, one would be a number like 5.673, or in fact, if we were to do a mathematical operation that couldn't work because we were multiplying by null or multiplying by undefined, we would get a value, not a number, or represented and displayed in code as NaN. Another data type is string. We've seen examples of that, hello, and various strings in the previous example that we built by concatenating strings and the values in variables together. And there's one final data type called object, and object is a special data type that in fact often holds a collection of information. So it may hold a whole lot of values, and they can be used for different purposes, and we'll spend some time the rest of this week and also future weeks looking at objects and working with them. Okay, I hope that gave you an insight into the different data types that are available in JavaScript. Thanks for watching.